Hi, welcome to Mindful Living Podcast, a podcast about psychology and life. I'm Gabrielle Loehr, your host, and I'm with Jake Farr, musician and music teacher. How's it going, Jake?
Very
Thanks so much
good.
for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and your music background. How did you get into music and then into teaching?
Okay. Well, I came from a family of musicians. My dad is a choir director, and so is my brother.
Nice.
And even there's a lot of non-professional musicians in my family as well. And I started playing guitar when I was about 10.
Oh, excellent.
And then just took lessons and got really serious about it around the age of 16 and started studying classical. And then I've always been really interested in songwriting and in education. And so now what I do is I just teach private guitar lessons and songwriting lessons, and I write music and try and share it with as many people as I can.
Excellent. And then, so how did you get in, like, what got you into guitar as opposed to, like, another instrument?
That's a good question. It's kind of a random answer. I actually wanted to play the drums whenever I was 10, and my parents didn't want to get a drum set for obvious reasons. And so they bought my brother a guitar.
Oh, excellent.
And then right before Christmas, my brother told my parents he didn't want the guitar, and they just had this guitar. So they gave it to me for Christmas, and I kind of fooled around on it a little bit and just kind of fell in love with the instrument after a while.
Oh, nice. Excellent. And it's funny, so I don't really play very much, but in 6th grade, probably, about 10 or 11, whenever, middle school band, I wanted to play the trumpet or the drums.
Yeah.
And my mom said, no drums, no way.
Yeah.
And so I got the trumpet. It was just so much smaller, and we lived in an apartment.
It's deceiving, though. So trumpet's pretty loud.
Oh, yeah. So. And, yeah, it's so loud. But that's why I wanted it, and it was fun. But I was going to be kept in beginning band for 2 years in a row. I didn't know private lessons were a thing when I was in middle school. I think if I had gotten that really would have sort of helped me go to the next level. And that's why I think private music lessons are so great, because they're accessible.
Yeah.
There's so many fantastic music teachers.
That's true.
And, and you can teach kids of, like, what's the youngest you teach?
The youngest I currently teach is 4.
Oh, nice. What instrument?
I teach all of my students are guitar, except for a couple of little ukulele students or bass students or something like that.
Oh, little ukulele, that sounds so cute. Because ukuleles are small,
oh,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so sometimes that's easier for the really young kids to do.
Oh, excellent. So then, what age or where in school do students usually first start with music lessons?
I would say it tends to be different, because the students that I have that start when they're 4 or 5 have been telling their parents that they want to play music.
Okay.
And that happens sometimes. But I find for someone who's more like me, to where they weren't necessarily planning on it or didn't feel that passionate about it at the very beginning, the normal age is anywhere from 7 to 10.
Okay. And so what grades?
I think that's like 3rd to 5th grade.
Okay.
Seems to be when kids start having the patience to sit through a 30-minute or hour-long lesson and try something that's a little difficult at first.
Okay, very good. Now, do you think it matters what instrument children start with?
I don't think that there's one that's better than the other ones, but I think each instrument gives you a different knowledge of music.
Okay.
For example, if you play guitar or piano or the harp or any kind of instrument where you can play more than one note at once, you have like a really fundamental understanding of harmony.
Okay.
And like how the notes work together in chords.
Okay.
Whereas if you're playing the violin or the trumpet, you probably have a better understanding of scales and melody.
Okay.
But it would be the whole orchestra that would make the chord, as opposed to one instrument making a chord.
Okay. So that's kind of reassuring for kids that maybe are interested in music, but it seems like the first instrument is always piano. And everyone has piano teacher. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's fair. I've known my uncle's a piano teacher. My husband is a piano teacher. And he also teaches guitar too. But yeah, it just seems like that's like the mandatory first instrument.
Yeah.
But so it's good to hear that's not necessarily the case.
I didn't mention this earlier, but my first instrument actually was piano.
Was it?
It's kind of like I don't talk about it that much because it's embarrassing to admit that I've had 5 years of piano lessons and still really can't play.
Is that common that you found?
A lot of people, especially kids, will come to the guitar from piano. And I think in piano, the traditional method of teaching, although not all teachers do this, but it's more classical, method book oriented, where you might be playing like, some songs that this person made up in this classical method book that's to teach them how to play the instrument, as opposed to playing Smoke on the Water or Sweet Home Alabama. So sometimes that has more of an appeal to kids when they're first starting out.
Okay, so playing a song they like.
Yeah.
Especially because the kids' movies are like, musicals.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's great.
I know, I'm sure there are some that aren't, but I mean, everything Disney is a musical.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't think of a Disney movie that's not a musical.
Yeah, that's true.
And I mean, and even TV shows a lot of the time, cartoons. I mean, SpongeBob, they sing,
Yeah, I get a lot of mileage with my younger students, and they're really passionate about learning theme songs.
Oh, that's excellent.
Like Pirates of the Caribbean or Frozen theme songs.
How many times have you taught Let It Go?
I would probably not as many as you would think, but I'd probably say I've taught it 10 to 15 times. But and that movie's only been out for a couple of years. But it doesn't matter to me how many times I teach a song because the student's experience with it is unique each time.
Oh, that's excellent.
Some students will pick it up, they'll come back the next week and they can play it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And some students, it's like you have to really work with them technically how to play 3 notes to where it sounds the correct way.
Now, going back to classical, because you said you've had experience with classical and you teach that, I know, and so my nephews, they're like all about Minecraft.
Yeah.
And Minecraft parodies, and this is something that my husband's told me too, is that Minecraft parodies are a great intro to like different genres of music.
Yeah.
I mean, and there can be a lot that plays on like classical or genres that people might not think when they think of like a video game parody, but it's bringing, just exposure that, these kids, how would they, they might not get otherwise.
That's very true. And I think that's one of the things that makes good, like, children's programming is, even when I was a kid, like the Bugs Bunny, musical montages where he's running around doing all these silly things through like a symphony or something. Mm-hmm. And then forever, when you hear that symphony, you think about Bugs Bunny. But at the same time, it becomes familiar so that if they choose to learn an instrument, they really can appreciate the music.
That's excellent. Or like Fantasia.
Yeah.
Again, another Disney movie. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are surprised to know that the music was not made to go with the animation, but the complete other way around.
Yeah. That is really interesting.
Yeah, but and there is so much classical in theme songs. Mm-hmm. That is true. That's an interesting way to, kind of help keep something relevant in the modern age, because symphonies are fantastic, but they're not always accessible.
That's true.
And it's not because of the people in them. I've never met everyone I've ever met that plays in a symphony. I'm sure there's pretension, but most people want you to come and listen to what they're playing.
Oh, yeah.
They want anyone to be able to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Obviously some people will be more exclusive, but for the most part, musicians as a whole tend to be very, like, welcoming, kind of tolerant people, I found.
Yeah.
And I noticed it always seemed like guys always were able to bond over music.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it would just cross so many barriers. And I know when I was, like, in high school, I always kind of admired that and was like, I wish girls had something like that they could just seem to so effortlessly, like, bond over. His musical styles and bands you like.
It does. I love the relationship development that kind of comes from it sometimes. And one of the things that we do with my studio is that we do lots of just jamming, where I'll host like a workshop where we'll just get together and play some easy chords, and I show everyone how to play a pretty simple scale, and then we just
Nice.
take turns jamming with each other.
Oh, that's excellent.
And it's amazing to see how much better people get after one of those experiences,
oh, nice.
after the relationship forms.
Now, is there a place for improv in
Oh, yeah.
what you do? Like now, does the improv come more from the folk music you prefer, or from classical?
I think the improvising, and the way that I teach it, is comes a lot from learning the scales or the arpeggios,
Okay.
because those are the same across whether you're playing, Mozart or Van Halen. You're going to be finding,
Okay.
the same scales and stuff like that. So
Okay.
you learn those fundamentals, and then you can just kind of dress it up however you want to.
Okay, excellent. So you go for what's most in common with all the genres. Now, would that be sort of a theory-based approach, or?
It gets really tricky on the guitar, because I used to try and teach technique and theory at the same time,
Okay.
which is technique, showing them what to do with their hands, and theory is them understanding it.
Okay.
And that turns into a black hole where everyone is confused by the end of the lesson. But what I found works better is if I teach them separately, or I use minimal theory when I'm teaching technique, or minimal technique when I'm teaching theory.
Okay.
So here's an example that maybe will make sense a little bit more. If I was going to teach someone to play blues improv,
Okay.
I just teach them how to play the simple 5-note scale that's a little common shape used on the guitar. It's called the pentatonic scale.
Okay.
And almost everybody can start playing it right off the bat.
Okay.
And improvising with it, it looks like a little pentagon if you connected the dots. And so everyone gets it immediately.
Because
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, excellent.
And so they can be sounding like they are a really great blues improviser right off the bat, but they have no clue what they're doing
Okay.
mentally. It's just using their ear and feel.
So, have you found, because I know I've worked with a lot of people with performance anxiety or test anxiety, and that makes sense because, now, especially for like kids in school, the focus on standardized testing is really just enormous. So they're dealing with all these things. But now, have you found that sort of working with them on that, I totally lost my train of thought.
Well, I have found that
I'm so sorry.
no, that's a good question, because I think a lot about performance anxiety, and because I've had to. I had pretty bad performance anxiety, especially when I was first starting, and I don't think I ever play a show or anything where I don't feel at least a little nervous,
Okay.
even if I'm doing a workshop for my students.
That
So
makes
you,
sense.
as a musician or any sort of performer, you have to, butt up against that quite a bit. And I think one thing that improvising does help with performance anxiety is realizing that there's not so much pressure on always playing everything perfectly. Because you can kind of make something up in the moment if you need to.
Because that's what improv
Yeah.
is. But now, so do you find, so I remember what I was going to say, do you find by teaching them the technique before the theory, are you able to kind of trick people into doing things they would maybe tell you they couldn't do?
That's exactly, yes.
Oh,
Because
excellent. I
if
think that's fantastic.
If you tell people, I'm going to teach you the pentatonic scale system, or whatever, they're thinking, oh no, here it comes, the music theory I was dreading.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, trick them into doing something, and then later you say, by the way, that was the pentatonic scale, then they're like, it's not so bad.
That's excellent. Very good. Yeah, and I think with a performance, especially if kids are able to start when they're younger, but I guess even adults with, something like karaoke, it seems like in a way performing can help with maybe some social anxiety or help with putting yourself in front of people, communicating, kind of interacting in a different dynamic.
It does that on so many different levels. One is being an introverted person myself, having to get comfortable with, putting yourself out there in front of people has definitely made me, more socially, I guess, courageous to go into situations that otherwise would make me feel uncomfortable.
Oh, that's excellent.
But it also is a good tool for breaking the ice. I mean, if someone's playing an instrument, you immediately have a conversation topic.
Yes.
Which is, hey, I really like the way you played, or something like that.
How'd you get into that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I liked your explanation of the pentatonic scales because they all sound like very intimidating.
Yeah.
I mean, my husband has this book of like scales, and the name, like, it's a practice book, but for like more advanced musicians.
Yeah.
So the pages are mostly black. There's not a lot of white space on them.
I think I've seen some of those books.
Oh, I'm sure you have.
He's let me borrow them.
Yeah, and the names on of some of the scales look like, made up words on like learning disorder tests because they're so long and like technical sounding. So I see this and I'm like, wow. Like, how long does it take to get to the point where you would play a book like that? And obviously there's going to be, it's not going to be the same for everyone.
That's true.
But like, on average, assuming, if someone gets into music and likes it, they're probably going to practice 3 days a week at least if they enjoy it. Maybe, ideally every day. But I would figure at least, is that about right? Would you say?
It does vary. I have students that practice every day, and I have students that don't take their guitar out except for lessons, but they still really enjoy it. So
okay.
It kind of, and I think people go through seasons, but I say 3 days is a good average.
Now, if someone were to want to get to a point that they can play those like crazy scale books that like music teachers use to like keep you up on your keep your chops up, how dedicated do you have to be? Pretty dedicated.
It depends on a couple of things. One is if you're wanting to do music for a profession, that puts a different sort of motivation behind you to where like maybe I would memorize some scales or something that I had to work really hard at, but I knew that if I wanted to do this with my life, I need to do that. But then I think, because that's only, a certain percentage of people who want to do it with their life, but for other people, I think it depends on the genre they're going into. And if you want to do something like jazz improv, then it's much more important that you know the different scales and arpeggios and stuff like that. Whereas in a lot of other genres, you could be at the top of that genre without knowing as many.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the genres you like, is there a difference between what you like teaching versus what you like playing? I would kind of figure as a teacher that you work with people on their interests because you want to sort of share your love of music. Mm-hmm. But so when you're playing and like composing and writing, like what do you like to play?
I love to, it does vary a little bit, but I would say I like to mix folk with classical, and sometimes with a little bit of like alternative rock sounds. Those are my favorite genres. And so what that means to me is like I pay special attention to the chord progressions and the voice leading and making interesting textures. Like sometimes instead of just playing chords or just playing a melody, doing that at the same time. And so I think that makes for more elegant guitar parts, which is where the classical fits in. I'm using theory, I'm trying new chords or new chord progressions. But then I also write things that are very simple, just because I like the way they sound. And so I always like to do that as well.
Yeah, it seems like it's very easy to... there's a lot of ways people overcomplicate things, trying to sound good or impress people. Lots of reasons.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true.
So it does seem like being able to pare it down, because I think a genre is like punk, which is like, 3 chords.
Yeah.
And it's not like difficult to play, but it's a beloved genre that, the simplicity is part of what makes it so good.
Yeah, definitely.
And it seems like folk in some ways is sort of similar because when I think folk, I think like girl and a guitar. But I know you mentioned Simon and Garfunkel earlier, and that's better than, I don't like a lot of girl and guitar stuff. I think because the songwriting, like the lyrics get so cheesy so quickly. And Simon and Garfunkel, they had I think, great storytelling.
Yeah, that's right.
In their songs. And that's something that I think, the one that wrote All Along the Watchtower, Bob Dylan. He's the same with Simon and Garfunkel, I think their singing is better than his. Yeah. But Dylan was not renowned for his beautiful voice. His lyrics, fantastic.
That's an example of someone not being technically proficient in the normal sense, like we were talking about earlier, but, through his, I guess, charm or persona, everyone loves his voice. Although technically no one would go to music school hoping to sound like Bob Dylan.
No.
So.
Oh, like Leonard Cohen too.
Yeah, he's a great example.
Yeah, his voice is so scratchy and distinctive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, how could you even if you wanted to make your voice sound like his, what would you have to do? Like chain smoke and like drink whiskey for like, I mean, hopefully not destroy your vocal cords in the process. So now, and this is something I've noticed, because there's a lot of things that smart people will do to try and kind of like BS other people, or sometimes really creative people or people that know a lot more than those around them and they know that. So I've been to some shows where there are people that think they're improving, and it's crap. And it's kind of a disgrace to musicians that do improv. So like how do you help kind of steer students towards you're not just making things up just to make them up. You're sort of working within a framework that's going to sound good, as opposed to thinking that any like weird, like hitting the string weird is like, that's what you're trying to do, is like, maybe I'll hit it weird again. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I have a couple of illustrations I like to use for that in particular, because that's a really big deal. And sometimes for beginners, it's not even because they're trying to impress anyone. Sometimes it's just because they don't know that part of music is being silent. And so they will just continue to play and continue to play.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so one of the things I like to tell people is to think of it like a language, and to only do simple sentences. Like, like the most elementary sort of sentence. You wouldn't do any additional clauses or compound sentences or something like that.
Okay.
And so whenever they're playing, I'll tell them to play something very short, and then to let it rest, let it breathe, and then come back in with something. And after they've done that enough, I'll allow them to do a more complex phrase or something.
Okay, so you sort of baby steps.
Yeah. And also, the guitar in particular is such a complex instrument. There's 6 different strings, there's, around 20 frets, and then you can hit the same notes in different places, and any combination of those. And so it gets really complex, and what you do as a student is you learn all the scales, you learn where all the notes are, and then you feel this pressure to use all the scales and all the notes when you start playing.
Okay.
Which is very difficult. It's even difficult for me sometimes whenever I'm playing to something that really only requires the most elementary of like a lead line or of a chord progression. Because you want to showcase what you've worked so hard on for so long, but if you want to play tastefully, you have to really use your ear and be intentional about it. Use
restraint. Now, does that vary somewhat based on who you're playing with? I mean, even within the same genre. Mm-hmm. Like, I know with jazz, there's a lot of feeding off each other. I mean, in rock, too. Is there sort of the same thing in folk? As much of the sort of in the moment?
There can be. Together? There can be. I do a lot of singer-songwriter solo things.
Oh, excellent.
And so what I end up doing is usually planned out pretty well beforehand. I have some improvisational moments, but I would say mine are most of my songs are pre-composed.
Okay.
To where even if there is a lead in there, because I'm doing everything on one guitar, I have to think about it beforehand, how it's going to work out.
Okay. Now, we've talked about sort of working with kids. What about teaching adults?
I would say that's, although I love my kid students, that teaching adults, and specifically adult beginners, is one of my favorite things to do.
Now, how come?
I think that there's something about, just in general, about adults whenever they decide that they want to take lessons and, they maybe have never had any musical experience before, that they're just come into it really open, wanting to have an experience. They're willing to practice. They are really interested in what I'm sharing with them. Whereas a lot of times with students, younger
no idea what that is.
Firecrackers.
Yeah, it sounds like firecrackers. All right.
Well, I guess with students, younger students, sometimes they, it's just another thing they're doing. They're in baseball and they're in guitar lessons and they have to do their math homework.
Being carted around everywhere. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So adults, there's just this energy and they understand. They've learned so many different things in their life, how to do so many different things, that they understand the value of starting out with good technique from the beginning.
Oh, excellent.
And like really taking it slow and. So it's just really fun to watch that progression.
Now, what about, I've seen this, there's another kind of adult demographic with my husband as well, and they seem like they can be slightly more challenging students. Adults that have played on their own for a long time and have terrible techniques they've done for years.
Yeah.
So how do you work with students like that? Do you work with a lot of students like that?
I have a few. I see a lot, and a few stick around.
Okay.
Because it's really, it depends on their mentality.
Okay.
If they realize that they've plateaued and they really want to, break through, then they'll be open to the things I'm asking them to do. But a lot of times they can sound pretty good with bad technique, or they've learned their specific theoretical tricks that can get them, 60% of the way to understanding a piece of music. And to get past that, they would have to go back to the elementary things about music. Like, what is good left-hand position? Or how do you know what notes belong in a key? Okay. And sometimes they don't want to go there because that doesn't involve them playing to the height of their abilities, I think.
Okay. Now, do you have a lot of students because I'm thinking for adult students, there's so many more places that people can come to lessons from. There's also a lot of people that took lessons in something as a kid, and totally, like you said, kind of it's just one of the things your parents take you to, so you kind of take it for granted. And then they go back into music as an adult, either maybe the same instrument or maybe something different, but adults that kind of have that background as a kid, and then there was a long time in life when they didn't really do anything musically.
I think it's amazing how much it helps. I all the time will get a student that I'll say, have you had any previous musical experience? And they'll say, no. Well, I played trumpet in 7th grade. Something like that. It was a long time ago, I don't remember anything, and what does playing trumpet have to do with playing the guitar? But without fail, they already understand so many things intuitively about rhythm and melody, and even the coordination of moving your fingers. Even if it's only, a few fingers on the trumpet, it's still, a part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the hand-eye coordination, because I never really did sports or music, and, I mean, I'm not a graceful dove, and so there's a lot that can help that. But I know, I've kind of tried to learn guitar a couple times over the years, and, and it helped, so much. It was interesting, and I didn't realize how, off my, my pinkies, they don't do what I want them to. And it was just difficult, but it also helped with, wrist strain. Because I work on computers a lot, and I play video games, and I noticed, my left hand, from just moving my hand like that, I had pretty annoying chronic wrist pain that almost completely went away, because, my hand muscles were being worked in a way they never had been before.
Yeah. I could definitely see that. I actually had the opposite problem of playing guitar too much, making my wrist hurt. Because at certain points in my life, I've played upwards of 40 to 60 hours a week. And so then it can just really be a problem. And then when I wasn't doing that, I was transcribing music on the computer. And so it just is something that, everyone's got to look out for no matter what their job is, figuring out what repetitive motions they're doing and everything like that.
Oh, that's interesting. And you use, proper technique, I'm sure. Yeah, any teacher that's,
Although I don't have the best posture, as you can see right now. I don't always sit up straight like I probably should, but I'm sure that would be better.
But I know, something I've noticed though about musicians is there's your posture now, but if you had a guitar, it would fix itself. instantly. I mean, because I've noticed that with piano players. All the piano players I know have terrible posture, and then they get at the piano, their back is straight as a rod, and I mean,
That's
it's
hilarious.
beautiful. So I think, I mean, because it seems like the body memory of it, and that's something I think that it seems like music has in common with sports that I think isn't really necessarily talked about, is that when you get to, I mean, doing anything, especially if it's physical, to do it well, you have to do it over and over and over and over again. I mean, that's why you have to practice so much. And it seems like the body memory is just as important for guitar as it is, say, like tennis or swimming.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that, it takes a long time when you're learning an instrument. It's something that you're doing with your hands and your brain. And it sounds like it's your hands and your brain doing the work. But then once you have spent that amount of time with the instrument, it becomes a part of you. And then it can be a whole, like, mind-body experience. It's like, potentially the way you breathe might change based on what the song is, or how you move, or how you feel the rhythm within your body.
Do you find that your breathing, like, matches, like, the beat of the song sometimes that you're playing, or the pacing?
I don't know if it matches the exact beat, but I have noticed that I'll use it as a tool to like emphasize like a certain part of a passage, like exhaling at that moment, or if like there's a pickup note that's hard to get, to inhale like on the beat and then react to that inhale whenever you're coming in. So I don't do it that often, but I have done it before.
That's interesting.
Some of it is subconscious too.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I bet if you were to pay attention to it, you might notice more. I mean,
I'm gonna be paranoid now.
Well, but that's not what you're thinking about when you're doing a. Well, I wonder, because I know in like yoga, and I'm sure with like trumpet. Yeah, I remember that with trumpet. It was because now like I know how to breathe through my nose, but I remember in 6th grade it was. Yeah, not something I was great at, and I think that's called like cyclical breathing.
Oh yeah.
That trumpet and like in horn players try to work on is the constant breathing, and they could learn from monks. I mean, it's interesting because monks get into a lot of advanced like breathing techniques too for different reasons, but and that's something about music that's interesting is how it can kind of affect the brain. I remember when I was studying for grad school, there was a book, Study Smarter, Not Harder, and it had this whole section on like music and studying and memory, and I mean, it was probably 15 years ago, so they talked about Baroque specifically, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot more like kinds of music that are researched, but that helped with like the memory, I mean, for school stuff, but other kinds of music, like for exercise or for athletes, they found higher tempos. You can like get more performance than you would like people will push themselves. I mean, up to 20% harder in workouts based on, I mean, and that's big enough to make a difference. Like how your workout is. I mean, or if you're anxious and studying like crazy, because I mean, everyone in college, I mean, it makes you crazy a little bit, especially near the end, or if you have a lot of tests, or anyone applying to professional schools. So, I mean, it seems like it helps memory, but it also can help soothe in a way, too.
Oh, yeah. I could see that. I mean, the most recent study I've heard of that reminded me of was playing music for your dogs actually will make them calm down.
Really? What
like
kind of
classical music? Whenever you're like leaving for vacation and they're freaking out, if you play classical music, there's studies that show it will kind of calm them down. And I'm sure it has the same effect on humans.
Oh, I bet.
It only makes sense. And I think part of it is also it's like the reason people have a hard time working out or studying or whatever is because it's usually boring or they don't want to.
Yeah.
And I feel like
for both.
Yeah. And music is usually something that I think really connects with people's heart. And so if it can like somehow bridge that gap to where I will work out, push myself harder if I'm listening to rock and roll, or I will study a little longer if there's, some instrumental classical going on in the background, then I could see that being an element of it as well.
Now, do you ever use, I mean, is there music that you like listening to? If you're trying to do certain things, like maybe to get yourself going or to chill out, or, I mean.
Sometimes, honestly, and this is probably just my personality. I would say I drive in the car to complete silence. Most of the time, I when I do work out, I usually don't listen to music.
Okay.
And I used to a lot, and that's something that is difficult, is because I used to listen to music and love it so much to where now that my profession is music all the time, I don't really do it. I don't listen to it with the same sort of like, naivety that I would have beforehand.
Okay.
And so that can be a really good thing and a bad thing too.
Now, is it okay? So when you listen to music, does your brain just automatically just go to town on kind of like, because you transcribe a lot to teach students songs, so do you sort of just automatically go to that?
I don't feel like I do.
Okay.
Like I think that I can just listen to a song without analyzing it or something.
Okay.
I think honestly what gets me most of the time now, and I think this is just something that happens probably to everyone, is the subject matter, like the lyrics of a song. And if the lyrics of the song, if I feel like they're compromising, or the guitar part, I feel like they're compromising on something, it's really hard for me to enjoy the song. Because I, as a songwriter, sometimes make compromises, and I hate it when I hear those things in my music. And I feel like I can hear them in other people's music too, so probably part of my own baggage.
That's interesting, though. I mean, that you're aware of that. Because, I mean, that's just good self-awareness in general.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of musicians that are not self-aware. Or, I mean, how things like that, what they listen to, how it can relate to their own sort of things.
Definitely.
It's interesting. So now, what do you think for music? Because YouTube and like social media and devices like iTunes, Spotify, those are fantastic devices for music listeners. But I know for musicians, it seems like it's really kind of fundamentally changed how music is delivered and promoted. I mean, YouTube in particular. Like Justin Bieber, that's why we have Justin Bieber. That always kind of blows my mind. Like, that's what YouTube gave us, is Justin Bieber. I mean, and there's other people too that are good as well. But I mean, in terms of a like performance and like a gigging musician composing, how has that sort of changed music delivery?
I think it is I think it's always been that way with different things, like, whenever they first came out with cassette tapes and then CDs or digital music, and then I think it will always be changing. Okay. And I think that it's just up to musicians, which people do all the time, to find new novel ways of sharing their music that can make them some money.
Yes.
And then also be, personally satisfying. Which one thing I was mentioning to you earlier that I think does that, like in today's culture, is like I'll spend months and months working on one song, and then I could go perform it at a coffee shop or a bar or something, and that's fun for its own reasons, but there's not a lot of listening going on because it's the people went there for their coffee or glass of wine or whatever. And so one thing that a lot of songwriters are doing now is the house concerts.
Okay.
Where people get to avoid going out anywhere, having to deal with parking. It's free. They get to come and enjoy like a really personal, like 45-minute set of music or something like that.
Oh,
and usually it's donation based, so a lot of artists actually usually end up making a lot of money from it, more than they would a normal gig. Without even charging anything.
And that seems like, I love it. That seems so just personal.
Yeah, and it's so much more personal than a YouTube video or a Spotify streaming, although I love those things and use them all the time. There's something really special about having someone inside your house performing for you.
That is, especially with when you say like keeping things at home and people staying in and saving money. I think of dinner parties. Which, I mean, I love dinner parties. They're fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And you can have potlucks, and especially Austin. I mean, it's such a food city here, but a lot of places are food places.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes down to it, I mean, I know there's some places that you go to and the food is awful, but most places in the U.S. that's not going to be the case. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and there's definitely a resurgence of that. I mean, especially places. I mean, Texas has so many DUIs, so it seems like in-home musicians that like really makes it a kind of a complete package.
Yeah.
For I mean, one that sounds budget friendly because bars get expensive quickly, but I mean also it's safer. There's so many DUIs here. It's crazy. I used to live in Chicago. There's not as many DUIs there.
Wow.
Yeah, here I know so many people that have had one there. It was like the hardcore alcoholics had them.
Yeah.
You know. But I mean, but Austin being such a music town, that's what people want, you know.
Yeah.
So I would never have even thought of that as something that's happening. So is it easy to find musicians like to have house concerts?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because it's more, and it doesn't have to be someone who has a really nice house.
Okay.
I mean, you don't even have to have a house, technically. You could do it in an apartment or in like a shared space or something like that.
Okay.
And it's really, each one is totally unique because the host finds their friends and invites them over for an evening. Everybody hangs out, has a good time.
Excellent.
And so, but the one thing that's interesting about it is it's like a new thing.
Okay.
That all these songwriters are doing, but in the same time, it's like the most old-fashioned way you could have ever done it.
Well, yeah, because like, my grandma can sing because she's 88 and she didn't have, like, electricity for a long time, but they had, like, a piano and they sung, and that was, I mean, and for a long time, that was how people entertained themselves.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, so many houses had pianos, whereas now I think that's not the case. I mean, nearly as much. So how, if someone wanted to find a musician for that, and you do house concerts, so like obviously in your site, we're going to link your site, so if someone in the Austin area wants you to say grace a dinner party, but if someone were to look for like a musician for a house concert, like how would they do that, especially since it does sound like a very emerging, but it sounds so personal.
Yeah.
And people are big on that. You know, everyone wants everything that's artisanal, unique.
Definitely.
And that sounds like exactly a way to do that, but that actually doesn't exploit the musicians, which is how most things seem to end, is like, and everyone gets paid but the musicians.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That happens. I think that there are some emerging companies that are like mass producing that, and one local one in Austin, I hope I'm saying this right, is called Let's Bevy. LETSBEVY Incorporated, and they're kind of getting off the ground right now, and I've spoken with the CEO, and he's a really great guy and is really excited about doing exactly what you're saying, connecting concert hosts with musicians and making sure that it's fair for everyone involved and like easy and personal, and but then on a more like a foundational level, if you go somewhere and you hear a songwriter or someone that plays a style of music you could envision having in your home, I would be really surprised if the musician said they did not want to do it.
Okay, because I found in my own experience, like, 'cause my husband plays jazz and classical, and those are genres that before we met I had wanted to learn more about them, but they're confusing.
Sure.
And I've realized it's taken me a long time, but it's because they're not kind of explained or like categorized the way other genres are. Because like in classical and jazz, like jazz has standards, and classical it's like there's pieces. So it's like in rock it would be cover songs.
Yeah.
But jazz standards, that's what everyone does.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so it's by standard, so you can look at a song or like a piece, like, like stuff from like the Nutcracker, you know, like, or Swan Lake, things like that. I'm trying to think of things that most people would know, or like wedding songs or different things that.
Sure.
There's a lot of times people play classical, but so there's the specific thing it is, but then there's also who's playing it.
Yeah.
And I've realized that gets very confusing, and what I think can make jazz and classical come alive more for people is seeing people play them. Because the standards are the standards are the standards. And when you recognize them when one person plays them, then you can start to have that. And I think that could be a way to help, really educate people, because there's so many people that would love to learn more about classical or jazz or folk or genres of music that don't get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And that seems like such a good way to almost, in a way, be community outreach and education. In a little bit, help teach music appreciation in the moment.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think like the popular understanding of music is that the person that's singing the song wrote the song, or that is playing the song, composition, composed it.
It's almost, that's not the case a lot of times.
And especially in jazz, you can find some like recordings of the composer doing it with his, band, but then, the other 100, 500 times it's been recorded, it was by somebody else.
Yeah.
And everyone learns some. And so then at that point, it's less about listening to that specific standard and more about listening to that specific player and their technique and improv and voice coming through. But in classical, it's even a little bit different than that, to where classical musicians you may not want to hear the composer try and play that song, because maybe they can't even play it. There's classical composers, and then there's classical, musicians, or like instrumentalists or vocalists, and sometimes those cross, but not as much as the other.
Okay, that makes sense. I know for classical, to help me understand the relationship between composers and players, the relationship is a Shostakovich, the composer, and he was Russian, right?
I think so.
With Rostropovich, I always say his name wrong, the cello player, and I know they were both either Russian or Ukrainian, but before Rostropovich, there weren't a lot of good cello parts. And then, but he was such a good cello player, he made it come alive. And fortunately happened to be alive at the same time as Shostakovich, who's, I think one of the more notable, like, recent composers. And so there's this wealth of, like, great cello music now that sort of sprung from that relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And I know, it seems like there's some instruments that hasn't happened yet. Like, I know someone that played the tuba, and they stopped because there's just not a lot of musical
as much solo repertoire
parts, I guess, for the tuba as other instruments.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And in the guitar world, that was Andrei Segovia, where he was, one of the first great, especially known for being like the father of the classical guitar.
Oh yeah, because that's not an instrument a lot of people think of with classical, but there's some beautiful classical guitar pieces.
And a lot of them were written for him.
Oh, wow, okay.
A lot of composers wrote for him during that point in time.
Now, do you know, like, what country he was from?
Spain.
Around when? Like, I know...
he was, I'm not sure exactly when he was born or anything, but, he was in the 1900s. So,
okay.
I know people that studied with him that are still living, so I can't remember when he passed away. He was like 95, and I'm not quite sure. But
he was alive in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Shostakovich and Rostropovich were too. I think from like the 40s to the 60s. I know they were both active during those decades. I'm not sure before and after, because there was a lot of political issues, as was the case. I know artists from Russia have historically had kind of issues with creative expression and the government and political expression, and that's been very interesting. But I know from what I learned about them, it's interesting to see how, like, the music community will reach out and help make sure people that are good are places that they can play their music.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. And with the cover stuff, I think Sia is great for pop music, because I don't think people realized how much pop singers use songwriters.
Yeah.
And Sia, throws down. She does great pop songs, I think. But it's really sort of shown that, no, she writes songs for a lot of good people. And and her last album was all songs she wrote for artists that they turned down.
Oh, really?
And it's
That's
really
awesome.
interesting. Yeah, like all the songs are for different artists. If you look it up, you can see like which ones she wrote for which artist.
That's really cool.
Or there was one that like she did with Adele that like almost made it on Adele's new album, but then like it got cut at the last minute. So then she re-recorded it without Adele singing it because Adele didn't want it like floating around. I don't know. It's very, very interesting to see. Now, so what would the etiquette be for like a house concert? Because I've worked with so many people with severe social anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
But also, you know, no one wants to be like that person.
Yeah.
But for like a house concert, I could see that. I mean, so what level of like interaction? So it seems like that would be more personal.
Yeah. With the ones that I've experienced, it's like there's different ways of doing it. But with the model that I'm currently kind of excited about and I'm using, it's the artist gets there, the first hour kind of sets up, then people show up and everyone hangs out and talks. It's very informal.
Okay.
And then when the concert starts, it's truly a listening room. It's like people are sitting there listening. They're not, you know, talking or really getting up unless they have to or something like that. Most of the time there's no kids under the age of 10, that type of thing, or they're in a different room.
Okay.
So it can be like a true concert experience at that time, and sometimes artists will ask, you know, does anyone have any questions about a song? So you can have some banter back and forth, and then at the end, it's just another time of kind of hanging out and potentially selling merchandise or making connections with people and things like that.
Like exchanging business cards, or maybe someone's interested in lessons or a house concert of their own.
Yes.
Okay. So
and the model I use is it's based off of a book. It's Shannon Curtis is the author.
Okay.
And she is a musician who kind of like made the collected ideas about house concerts and the way that she does them and everything like that.
Okay. Now, so let me use a dinner party as an example, because I love this idea of a house concert, and I love dinner parties, and I know like my husband and I are always wanting to entertain more because we're homebodies. Yeah. You know, and Austin's just grown so much. Everything's so crowded, you know. So if I were to say have a dinner party, like at what point would the musician come over, or musician? So would you come over while I was like in the last, like finishing up whatever cooking prep I was doing before people came over, and start setting up also during that time? Like how would the timing for that
I think with the way that I would do it is it would be like it could potentially end up looking like for the musician a 4-hour long event or something, because the musician would hopefully set up beforehand, you know, eat, talk with everybody, hang out.
So it would be appropriate for them to be a dinner guest then too.
Oh yeah.
Excellent. That's what I was going to ask, and I kind of figured, but okay.
And sometimes for traveling musicians who are touring with house concerts, depending on how well they know the people, they'll even stay the night at their house.
Okay. Oh, that's
so
neat.
it's a very kind of grassroots level way to perform and to tour and to make connections. And
if you're touring, that almost reminds me of like the traveling minstrels from, I don't know when. If I were to guess, I'd probably be wrong about the era, but one long past. But that's totally what that kind of reminds me of.
Yeah, it is. It's old fashioned, and at the same time, it's kind of new for our culture right now.
That's so great. And I like it too, because one thing I think YouTube has helped with is people are used to like, you get a closeness, like a physical closeness watching things on YouTube, because it's often more intimate, the shooting. Take this, you know, like this conversation, would it be the same if there was like 100 people here? Well, maybe, but but it feels more intimate. Definitely. Like this. And I think with music, do you feel that's translated into like the house concerts that you've done? People sort of like really appreciating that maybe in a way they wouldn't have 10 years ago when YouTube was still kind of new. Does that make sense?
You know, I think people do appreciate it more with the personal aspect of it, because it's a different sort of pressure that's put on the relationship between the performer and the audience.
Okay.
It's like if you're performing at Bass Hall for 1,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
there's no, I mean, you might make eye contact or you might get a VIP pass and get to talk to him backstage, but there's a wall there.
Yes.
And,
yeah, you're on.
Yeah.
You're very much at work for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you're playing background music at a bar or a venue, then there's also, usually people will be interested and it's very enjoyable and you talk to some people, but there's all the levels of disengagement because they came there for a different reason.
Yes.
But I think what YouTube and like that sort of media sharing helps with is helping people feel comfortable with having you over in the first place.
Oh, nice.
They can
That's
see,
awesome.
they're not just listening to a recording of you. They can see you, they can see your mannerisms, how you act, how you would play the song, stuff like that.
That's interesting. So now, in like a normal house, would you just be playing like maybe in someone's living room or like a backyard if
Yeah,
the
living
weather
room,
permitted?
backyard.
Okay. And then how many people, or would it kind of just depend on like the house?
They can be any size. What Shannon Curtis recommends in her book is having 20 plus people there,
Okay.
20 plus adults. Less than 20 can feel a little too personal in a way.
Okay.
20 is like enough that people can feel like they're at a concert. It's a very intimate experience, yet they're not feeling that pressure to, I've played concerts at shows where only 1 or 2 people showed up before.
Okay.
I think every musician has, and there's a lot of pressure on that person to listen. And it can be uncomfortable. So I think that, it's fun, especially if you make it fun, but at the same time, I think there needs to be enough people there to where they can feel like they're not having too much pressure put on them.
So I wonder, you say 20, and I think for most people that seems fair, but Austin's a music city.
Mm-hmm.
People here love music. So I would think, if you have like a group of people are into music, would say 10 be okay?
I think it would be okay. And I'm in the process of booking a couple right now where the hosts, because of the size of their house, only feel comfortable having 15 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I am 100% okay with that. It's a little bit more pressure, not just on the audience, but also on the performer.
Okay.
If you've ever performed, it's easier almost to play for masses than it is to play for 2 or 3 people.
Yeah, I can see that.
It really makes a difference. And so
Interesting.
I think more is better, but at the same time, it's all of the experience is good experience, and you can make anything work. In that situation with less people, I think I would make it more of a conversation.
Okay.
Where I would like share a song, the backstory behind it, and ask for questions or engage the audience in other things like that.
Maybe in that sense, that's where storytelling
Mm-hmm.
and music are so linked.
Oh yeah.
And that definitely, because so many valuable things in life that, are passed down by story. But I think music, just from a practical standpoint, helps the people that deliver it remember it.
Yeah.
Because, just literally the timing, like cadence and stuff for when, and delivery and things.
That's exactly right. And it has such a different hold in your memory. People with dementia who can't remember a lot of things, like, their kids' names or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
can sing the songs that they learned as a child. It's amazing, and it's such a so it does have so many multiple levels, and that can work for you or against you as a performer, because I can sing and play a song and not think about anything at all. Like I won't, which sometimes is a good thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes though you're just going through the motions and you're not really in the
Mm-hmm.
moment, because
Okay.
it can just be total habit in a way.
And I think that's always a challenge when you get to a certain skill level,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so easy to just zone out, and everyone
yeah.
has days when they do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's one of those ongoing.
Yeah, you have to be present, and I think that's the art of the performer, regardless of if they're playing original music or cover songs.
Okay.
Is like how they give you that music in that moment is totally unique, like at a really detailed level, but then also the energy and the presence and their interpretation they bring to it is something special.
Very good. Now, I know you mentioned that you have a monthly newsletter.
Yes, I do. So besides teaching in my studio and then writing songs and performing, I also just enjoy writing. And so I write about different books that I read. I write about my inspirations, about songwriting, creativity,
Okay.
about different projects that I'm working on. And so I try to give something with the newsletter, but then also to share a part of my life or philosophy in each one as well. So I send out one every month, and I usually get a few responses from people, which is always really fun
Excellent.
to talk to people about their experiences with what I wrote about.
That's fun.
And so if anyone is interested, they can sign up at my website at jakefarrmusic.com.
Very good. And we'll have links to all of your sites.
Awesome.
And any social media like Twitter, Facebook, but the billion social media, whatever ones you have, send me links for
Sounds
those.
good.
And then definitely links for the house concerts.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I'll look stuff up on my own because this is a new concept to me, and I think that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And being someone that gives dinner parties, I think that sounds great. And
Yeah.
Because all the musicians I've known, they're such interesting people.
Yeah.
All of them, because people come to music from so many different places and they draw so many different things from it. And it always makes me sad to see that it's like the background music. It's exactly what you said. And that's sad because it's like you take these like fascinating people. Robert, he's going to be a guest on a future episode. Like at the graduation, he played the graduation. And it was totally, like background music.
Yeah.
Or, and every musician I've known is played, and you have 2 weddings for everyone in their family.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that can be, I suppose like your wedding present for your family.
Yeah.
But still, I like that it gives that opportunity to really let people get to know musicians.
Yeah,
Because
and that's
they
what
are
I
interesting people.
would have always wanted, is if I think about my favorite songwriters, which I've got to see a few of them perform, which has been amazing. But if I could do one thing different, it would be that after they performed, I got to sit down and talk with them.
Yes.
And like they knew who I was, I knew who they were. We got to like connect. I got to learn something about their personality.
Oh, for
so,
sure.
And it's not just really famous people. Sometimes it's people I even see playing background music, where I think it's interesting to make that connection.
Yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Yeah. And I'm going to try and write up a list, like a small guide for people for house concerts.
Okay.
From what you said. So, yeah, definitely I'll have you look that over for me. Add to it.
I can send you, I have a host guide I can send you.
Oh, fantastic. That would be perfect. Yes.
So
Because, again, anything to help people usher in something new without any sort of awkwardness.
Sure.
Because, having people in your house, people can get skittish about that.
Sure.
And you shouldn't open your house to anyone, but at the same time, you should not close yourself off to that, because that sounds like a great experience.
Yeah, it is really cool. And I've met a lot of people who have been really open to it, which has been really cool.
Very good. And so the links will be fantastic.
Great.
So informative. So thank you so much for being on this episode, and thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.